Hello, everyone. If you're just joining us, we just started the webinar, so we're giving everyone just a few seconds here to jump in and join us. We'll be talking about cybersecurity best practices, of course, and the CMMC in general. My name is Gary Arnold. I'm the marketing manager at Executech. I'll do some full introductions and we'll get going in just a second here. I want to give our attendees just another second here to join us. We'll jump right in and I'll introduce our panelists or our discussion drivers today. We have James Wright. James Wright is the Director of Technical Operations here at Executech. James has been here for 7-8 years now. So he's kind of an old timer with us and has been working in the IT industry for 10 plus years. He's one of our go-to guys with our professional services team and leads up that team. We also have Brad Hanly. Brad is the MSP systems engineer at ArcticWoof, and he's been working in the security and IT industry for years as well. Welcome, Brad and James.
Hello, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I wanted to start off real quick and surprise you guys with a couple of rapid fire questions, just so our audience can get to know you guys a little bit. Off the top of your head, what is your favorite movie, Brad?
Ooh, favorite movie, Top Gun.
Top Gun. Wow. James Wright, how about you?
So that's my close second, but I have to go with Billy Crystal's City Slickers.
Nice.
Hello.
And no fishing me. I don't use that as my security question.
That's what I should start doing, is start asking what town did you grow up in? What was the name of your first pet? No. Favorite vacation destination, James Wright?
Kauai. It's true island life.
Brad?
Ooh. In the US or outside of the US?
Favorite overall.
Ooh, Israel.
Wow. Cool. And last one, your favorite app on your phone, Brad?
That's a tough question. LastPass.
Very nerdy, very appropriate.
I'll give you a security answer.
James, how about you?
I don't think I have one because it all usually, surrounds work. But I will have to say it's probably ESPN. Right, so the way I can keep track of things when I'm busy and follow some of the favorite sports I like to watch. So, excellent.
Well, I am going to step back. If you just joined us again, this is the introduction to the CMMC cybersecurity discussion with James and Brad. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to throw those in the chat and we can bring those to our panelists. Again, we want this to be open. Any question is free game, so throw it out there, no problem. We'll field those to these guys. I'm going to let them go at it and have this discussion and step back and let you guys take it away. So go for it.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary, and thanks, James, for having me. And so, yeah, I guess we do have a formal presentation deck set up, but I don't think James and I kind of do the normal. I think we're just going to kind of talk through it. So we'll use it as kind of talking points. But we're going to cover a lot of ground. We'll cover on like the challenges in the defense industry base. We'll talk about how those challenges are being solved for with the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, and then how that's being effectively implemented and how we can help out in our partnership together. So this slide touches on something, James, that I think is pretty pertinent. And honestly, when I saw this statistic, it like freaked me out a little bit, but it also kind of validated what I was kind of expecting to see. The company did basically a survey of a large group of people within the defense industry base, the DIB. And today, and 3 years ago, this was the rule. You had to adhere to DFARS 7012, which basically says, not to get too into acronyms here, but NIST 800-171 is basically a list of controls that you have to implement. And what this DFARS policy was saying is you have to implement these rules and you need to self-attest to them. So basically do a self-assessment. So out of all of the people that had responded, 62% self-identified as not complying with that policy. I don't know, James, do you have any thoughts on this? Is this something you're seeing also?
Yeah, it is. It is true. A lot of times it's because they're not 100% sure of what to do, right? When you look at the NIST 800-171, there's 110 practices or controls that are in there. And most of the time, individual business owners may or may not want to even tackle the costs that are associated with some of those practices. They may not have taken the time. They may have thought they had more time. But to your point, individual companies that are following the DFARS clauses and NIST clauses that are in their existing DoD contracts were supposed to be NIST 800-171 compliant by the end of 2017. So the development and merger into CMMC is just literally just a handoff into some additional practices and controls that at least the folks that were sitting behind the scenes writing this thought it would be easy for us to do, right? But to this stat and to the fact that the majority of those contracts were requesting them to register for their SPRS scores, the folks aren't ready, and or they've taken shortcuts to be ready that don't necessarily qualify. So yeah, it is something we're seeing in the implementation area as well as, you know, just pure documentation area.
Yeah, and I've heard there's been a lot of studies coming from the current administration and previous administrations into the defense industry base and how secure it is and what it's actually going to take to get them secure. And the latest I've heard is the CMMC process in general is going through like a mass overview, a legislative overview to make sure that it doesn't impact small businesses to the point where they're no longer able to do business. And it's kind of interesting because I think it all comes back to this stat here and the fact that people were previously just saying that they're doing things when they might not necessarily have been doing it. Just so they could, get on the contracts and things like that. So
yeah,
I
think that's
kind of.
Go ahead.
No, I was done. Sorry, James.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say I think that's a great point because the initial overview of CMMC really is that the methodology is data-centric security process, right? So what that basically means is regardless of the size of the contractor, 5 users or 100 users, they had to follow the same practices. So for them to take the time is actually, to me, a good thing for industry because this is not a inexpensive thing to have to comply with.
Yeah. From a person in the defense industry base, I see that the problem is multifold, and being able to comply is one part, and then making that compliance a security practice is the other side of it. So in that same vein, and this is not something that I want to use to shame somebody, because that's not at all going to be how we as a country or as a people are able to overcome these threat actors. I think it's just more about gathering awareness and information about how things happened and occurred, and be able to utilize that knowledge and transfer that across other defense industry-based organizations, so they can kind of learn from the mistakes of others and try to prevent that from happening to them. So this is an interesting example where there was a small subcontractor that was a subcontractor in the supply chain of that of like Tesla, SpaceX, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and others. They were hit by what's called a ransomware as a service gang by the name of Doppelpaymer. And this happened just this year. And essentially what had happened is Doppelpaymer basically said, we're going to leak your data if you don't pay us. And I don't think that they were paid, and data was leaked. You can see some of that information that was already leaked. So some really sensitive information on their supplier side. And again, this is not an organization shame thing at all. That's not at all what I'm getting at here. This is just like a raising awareness. This is a real thing that affects companies of all sorts of sizes.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things that I definitely wanted to make sure I shared with the group today is that we have to raise our awareness, and we actually have to step up our game. The reality is these bad actors, these people out there that are trying to ruin our day and our weekends and our nights, they're getting more aggressive, and they're getting more creative, and they're getting more direct. I mean, if you think about one that's not on the slide, but the Conti hit that hit Florida, right? So the school district in Florida, same scenario. They knew a lot about them. They knew their budgets. They knew all that public data, and they were trying to use that to push them into paying for, monies. Oh, well, you can afford it because this is how much your budget is. But some of them are polite. Some of them are not so polite. Some of them just love to be bullies. But yeah, raising awareness, raising training with staff awareness. Those are some of the key thing right now, is just educating ourselves as leaders in our companies, as staff in our companies, and as individuals, with the Internet of Things in our homes. We have to be aware of more of what we need to protect ourselves from, because it can happen in any of those locations.
Another thing that I like to point out is, I know that a lot of people talk about how like threats are emerging and things are changing. And one of the things to kind of touch on here is the industry that goes after organizations such as Doppelpaymer, who's an actual threat actor group that attacks people with a ransomware as a service. They have their own business model, right? They're their own unique business entity, because they essentially make their money from people paying their ransom. And it's truly a ransomware as a service, meaning you log on to a dark website, you let them know the target and the bounty that you have on that target. They go in and try to gain access. And there's actually new vendors that are popping up called initial access brokers,
Yes.
IABs, which is another interesting thing. So Doppelpaymer, this is essentially, think of them as like a ransomware company, right? So they deploy the ransomware. These initial access brokers are actually going around trying to identify different ways to get into environments, and then they gain access and they sit low. And then what they can do is they can actually sell that access to these ransomware as a service providers, right? There's large money spends that happened. Like I was listening to, I'm a big podcast guy. I was listening to a podcast last night that was talking about this, and one of the companies was selling their initial access into an organization that wasn't humongous for 13 Bitcoin. And I think they mentioned that at that point it was like $400,000, and it was paid for, like a ransomware as a service company, right? Paid for it to gain that initial access, because they had the tools to run the ransomware attack after they had that administrative access.
Absolutely. What's on your next slide? Survey says.
Cybersecurity and maturity model. So talked a little bit about the problem. Now let's talk a little bit about the solution.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I want to talk about, a lot of people, like to know why. What is the why behind CMMC, right? So we had NIST 800-171, a very large self-attestation type model. DoD now is like, with all this stuff increasing, we now need to do something different. We need to add some controls and practices in place. So the why really is the ability for the DoD to really have a verification mechanism to ensure that the DIB companies have these practices and controls in place. And that really is where this came from, and why the word certification, specifically on this screenshot, is so big. We have to be certified. We actually have to not only do it, but be able to have somebody come in and actually certify that we're doing it and that we're doing it right. And that raises the bar. And even though this model only applies currently to DoD contracts, it is being reviewed for any type of federal contract in the future that it may apply, which means a larger subset of industry will have to comply with this. So
yeah, I heard that the Department of Homeland Security was in a pretty far along stage in evaluating CMMC for their industry, right? Their subcontractors. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. So yeah, definitely there's a lot of things going around. I think DHS even had launched it onto a few contracts that they had already.
yeah, and that's kind of the fun part is, as this rolls out, I mean, there is a specific number of contracts that will come out each year, year over year, but those are going to be, where they are expected to, for those years, already to be at the level stated in the contract, right? So The contracts will always tell us what level you have to be certified at. This year there's 15. Next year there's going to be 75. And then the numbers are going to increase from there until eventually in 2025 that every contract will have a CMMC level requirement to it. So just a couple things to keep in mind there as well.
Yeah, the really cool thing is it's a maturity based model, right? So like, and it, like James was saying, it will be applied on the master's contract. So whoever your primary is, they'll be able to let you know what level you need to be based upon whichever contract it is.
Yeah, that prime, that's their job, is they get the contract, and then your prime is going to dictate to you where you need to be. And at this point, you know, to clarify that, unless it's something that's off the shelf product, it is, if it's anything that is in that realm, that subcontractor must also be compliant to the same level that the prime is being held to. So
COTS, right? Right, James?
Yep,
COTS?
Yep, they're called COTS.
Commercial off-the-shelf goods.
Yep. So, and that is one of the things that we can help clarify there if there was any doubt in there. So, you know, you can take something off the shelf and say it's a flashlight. Then once you put on your magic film on the flashlight for the military, it's no longer off the shelf, right? Even though the product itself is still just a flashlight. You know, so those are some of the things we have to adjust our thinking to and be ready to dive deeper into what that is. And to your point, there's 5 levels to this thing, right? 5 distinct levels. And then in those levels, there's the maturity piece to it as well. And the hard part about it is once you get to level 2, there's actually distinct controls that are new that aren't part of the initial NIST. And then there's a little bit more added in part 3. Then by the time you get to level 3, right, you've got all 110 controls of NIST plus those 20 new ones that they're expecting you to be certified for. That's why they felt if you were already NIST 800-171 compliant, it would be an easy jump, because now we're just adding those additional few on level 2 and 3, and you're there for level 3, which is the majority of folks out there will have to be. So
yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's spot on. That's the reason. So like James had just kind of alluded to, like there's thinking that a large majority of the defense industry base is going to fall into levels 3 or 1. 2 is not going to be required on any contracts. It's an intermediary level, which I think is a tough thing to understand. And really what it means is that you're showing your prime that either you're going above and beyond what the requirements are in level 1 to secure whatever information you have. And in this case, it's FCI, right? Or federal contract information. Or you're ramping up to gain access into controlled unclassified information, CUI, which comes into play at level 3. So it's really just an in-between level that I think is kind of an interesting thing that they have in there.
yeah, it definitely is. And the maturity levels themselves, you know, as we talk about that, I mean, I think you have another slide that talks about the individual levels in here, but you know, it's going beyond what we've ever done before. And I think this is the best place to drop this note. CMMC is not an IT issue. It affects the entire company, right? Legal's involved with CMMC, your HR department's involved with CMMC, the administrative teams involved in CMMC and some of these practices and controls. Obviously there's IT, there's a lot of policies, there's a lot of meetings that you're supposed to hold technically with part of these different levels. And that is where that maturity comes in, right? The 5 phases of maturity is it being performed? Is it being documented? Is it being managed? Are we reviewing what we're doing? And are we actually tweaking what we're doing to better suit our scenario? So if you look through there, before it was just, are we performing these things? Yeah, we're doing it. Yeah, I've got MFA. Yeah, I've got these other approaches. But now we actually have to certify, which means an auditor from only one distinct group has to come in and look at it and say, yeah, you're actually doing it. So that is part of that process, and that is one of the expenses, is that C3PAO organization, or the only body that's allowed to certify for CMMC, has to be able to verify that we've actually done our maturing as a company through these levels. So
Yeah, and I think kind of on top of that, I think level 4 and 5, they're still up in the air, right? They're not completely locked down yet on what all is going to encompass them. I don't think the audit guide has been released yet on levels
no,
4 and 5 yet. But
no,
I would
that's kind
also
of the fun
suspect,
part.
yeah,
It's a work in progress for all of us, and we're all learning it as professionals in the security space, as well as how to deliver those solutions. But the great thing is those lower hanging fruit, the things that we can do on the lower end of CMMC aren't different and won't be any different from what we're used to with NIST. So it just requires us to take a very level-headed approach to it and how we implement it, but we do have to layer out our security with the different items that are needed throughout the processes, right? Our spam filters, antiviruses, good identity management, MFA, encryption, secure email, all of these things that we need to be doing in order to be hitting some of those lower hanging fruit markers.
yeah, and I think so. The level 5 is really kind of the drive towards, and this is a big marketing term that I think is being way overused, but zero trust. And that was something that the DoD themselves had said, that the CMMC model, as you go through the levels, it's all driving towards a zero trust or trust no one type of an environment. So when I hear the word zero trust, I automatically default to thinking, okay, so we might be talking about CMMC. That's probably the way the conversation is going to go. But when you hear zero trust, it's oftentimes referring to this specific framework. The NSA also had released out, I think this was like 2 months ago, they released their zero trust framework, which I do think that the Defense Department, the DoD, is going to utilize as they build up levels 4 and 5, and there becomes more solidification of what those levels are.
Correct.
So in that same vein, we've talked about, we've talked through the problems that the industry is facing. We've talked about how the Defense Department is going about trying to improve it. Now this kind of leads into the next process is how effectively is this going to happen? And it's going to be through the CMMC accreditation body, or the AB. So the accreditation body is actually a nonprofit organization who's in contract with the DoD, which I think is an interesting paradigm. And essentially the contract stipulates that the accreditation body is going to go out and formally assess and train what are called C3PAOs and RPOs. Think of the C3PAOs as the formal auditors, the ones that will come in and do the formal audit. And then the RPOs are the organizations that are out there that will be doing gap assessments. There's one major distinction between the C3, well, a few, and I touched on one of them, between the C3PAO and the RPO. But another big distinction is if a C3PAO organization engages you to do the assessment, they're not allowed to actually sell you any services. There's a very fine line, very clear line drawn in the sand of what's allowed and not allowed. And then on the RPO side, it's actually they're gearing you up for your assessment. They're doing a gap assessment. They can understand like where your gaps lie, and they can also sell you services and products to help kind of get you to where you need to be. So that way, when you go to take your formal audit with the C3PAO, you can rest assured that you're going to pass based upon all of the work that you've done with your RPO or your trusted advisor, like the team over at Executech.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make. I mean, if you think about it, we all love to pick on Microsoft. And part of that is because when they release updates on Tuesday, not all of those updates have actually gone through a true QA or a separate person, right? If I'm a programmer, of course my code is good. I don't need to get it checked. But yeah, that segregation, separation of powers, you want to call it that, where the C3PAO says this is what you need to have, and they don't get to financially benefit from that is a protection. And one of the things to keep in mind, and I think I might have touched upon it before, but when you look at these these certifications, we have to remember that we have to have achieved that certification in order for that, at the time that contract is being awarded. So if we submit for a contract that's a level 3 and we're only a level 2 or a level 1, and we're awarded it, but we don't have that certification, we can't be awarded it. They have to back out and say, I can't award that to you. So in that packet, we actually have to have proof that at the time of the contract's awarded, that we've already received it. Not working toward it, not working through our POAMs from NIST, but that we are actually there. Otherwise, the contracts will not be awarded to us.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's one of the larger things from a challenges standpoint of like, all right, so I'm in the defense industry base. CMMC is coming very quickly. I think the other aspect is oftentimes kind of lost in the wind in company politics and things like that, is the fact that when you're going through your formal audit, you have to show that you have this implemented, like these different controls implemented, and people know how to use them. Because the auditor, essentially what they'll do is they'll pull people aside and interview them. And in that interview, they'll ask them how they go through, like, what are the processes, what are the company processes?
Right.
And if they get stumped on something like that, that's showing that maturity is not there as an organization. And you have the possibility of missing out on whatever control they're auditing against, which leads to the next issue, is that audit is pass or fail, meaning that the level that you last fully met is the level that you default to if you fail. So for instance, if I'm going for level 3 and I miss one control in level 2, I'm automatically, even if I have all of the other controls successfully passed by that auditor, you're actually level 1 because you missed a control in level 2, which means you can't go anywhere above level 2. So it's an interesting thing, and it's going to be a big mindset change because it is going to be a pass or fail situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point to think about, because I don't think a lot of people understood that about those individual levels. And it just means that it's time as a group to take CMMC a little bit more serious. And where it is the word maturity, the other word that comes to my brain is litmus. It's the test of time, right? The test of time is, how long have you actually been doing this? And I think that right there is the other piece that tells some companies, well, what if I just wait till 2025 and then do it? Well, you're going to be behind the 8 ball, because other companies are already moving their organizations toward, being one of these levels and accomplishing these certifications. That puts them in prime space to get those contracts and that revenue coming in, because obviously, the opposite side of that is you lose money or run the risk of the income from those contracts being pulled back, or we have to actually pay back to the Department of Defense for those contracts for bad self-attestation practices.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of these, the bullet points on this slide really talk a lot to some of the misconceptions in the industry right now around what CMMC is. The idea that, it's no longer a self-attestation, it's actual third-party audit is going to be really big. We've talked a lot about these, the trickle down throughout the defense industry base. So if you're a sub of a prime, you still have these requirements if the contract that you're working on as a sub has a CMMC level requirement. One of the interesting things that we haven't talked on is Katie Arrington, who formerly was the Undersecretary of Defense, who is now on a leave of absence, I think is what they're officially publicly calling it. It's a very interesting thing. I don't know if we should really get into it, but
we'll leave that one over there.
Yeah, so she basically was the person at the DoD that was driving a lot of CMMC. So a lot of this is a lot of work that she's put in for the country. And one of the things that she had said on several occasions is, how are small businesses going to account for this? And she has very much so stated that she's expecting all of the Defense Department contracts to go up, like the the dollar percentage of the bids, they're expecting to go up, and they're expecting the defense industry to actually inflate their costs, so that way they can kind of account for some of that lost revenue that they might have in the investments towards getting whatever level of CMMC that they have. So I think that's something that's, you know, noteworthy.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, where they've talked about that. We'll see the additional bids go up to cover that cost. And that is the unfortunate side of this is, you know, the certification is what it is, and the costs are what they are, and organizations have to find a way to get to that level and then recoup it in a future contract. And that is part of the struggle of, and it's one of the top questions they ask on the CMMC sites is, you know, what if my organization just can't pay for all the controls? You know, so that is part of that challenge. It is part of the weighing the odds of, does my organization do work with the DoD? You know, or is that the only thing we do? But if it is, then we have to be all in, and we have to prepare ourselves and have deliberate budget meetings and know exactly what we're willing to dedicate each year to get ourselves to there. And hope we're on old contracts that don't expire for 5 years, that you have more time, right, to get the CMMC certification done.
That actually brings up a really good, you know, talking point where there might be some disagreement. I don't know, James, but of like when does the CMMC requirements come into play? And one of the things that I always point to is if you go to the Defense Undersecretary, if you go to their website under, I think it's like the latest news or something like that, it specifically states that you now have to start submitting your self-attestations of 800-171, and you have to be implementing the CMMC framework into your operating system models. And it goes back to what James and I were talking about earlier around you have to show that this is a baked in process in your organization rather than something that you put in just last night, because that's going to fall flat on its face a large majority of the time. So it's, I'm not trying to use this to scare anyone saying you have to be doing it right now, but I would, if I were a business owner that was in the defense industry base, I would veer on the side of being a little cautious and start to implement these things immediately. That way I don't either A, fail an audit, or B, have a large unexpected cost that I have to incur based upon it. Yeah, and sorry, James, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, you bring up something that triggered a thought. I mean, we've had meetings with clients of ours where other organizations come in and say, well, if you give us $100,000, we'll have you compliant in 2 months. Well, you might be able to have all of the controls in place for the practices, but it is impossible because it's a maturity model to be done in a couple of months. You're on your road to achieving this, but it's impossible. So if you have folks that are working with you and they're sharing that with you, it's not possible under these regs and the way they are. And to your point, that SPRS score, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication score that they're asking for them to attest. They actually have to log in and state what it is. So yeah, it's they're going to push hard over the next couple of years to really make sure everybody's lined up correctly.
James and Brad, we had a really good question, I think, that just came in. Do all these requirements that you guys have talked about, do they apply to non-DoD federal contractors?
So the answer to that question, at this time, CMMC only applies to DoD contracts.
Yep, unless you're one of the few, and I'll have to fact check myself after this, but I believe it was DHS that had stated that they had implemented it on, I think, 2 contracts of theirs, but it will get sent out, I suspect, to a broader audience and fully kind of replace the NIST 800-171. It will be morphed into CMMC.
Yeah, so I mean, to your point, the new stuff right, applies to that. But still, the majority of all federal contracts state NIST 800-171 compliance. That's 110 controls. That is literally the meat and potatoes of CMMC. So if you can't pass a NIST 800-171 audit of controls, then we need to get you there, because that means that is where your current contracts are already telling you should be there already, right? And that's where it gets concerning, because then that's where a lot of what we're talking about inside here has to be in place. Having log aggregation using something like a SIM, antivirus, like tools that ArcticWoof gives us. You know, having managed IT of the network, right? So everybody knows what's going on, who's logging in, where are they logging in from, are they secure, are they who they say they are? All these different things. Are my computers encrypted? Is this going this way? Do I have personal use of cell phones in controlled areas? All these questions are all in NIST that should have already been answered. So yeah, so at this point, yeah, it's all going to be rolled out under that DFARS clause, but we're expecting other contracts will see CMMC creep into it. And that's the scary part. When and where, some of those we don't know. But the DoD, we know a specific number. To give you an idea, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier. 15 this year, 75 next year, 250 contracts in 2023, 325 contracts in 2024, 475 contracts in 2025, then all of them will require it. Those are the ones that are already on the radar for the various areas that they will be rolling out those up to level 3.
So kind of moving the dialogue into how you know, we're able to help out. So I actually did a study of what ArcticWoof does in part of our service, not adding into all of the different things that Executech does. So this is purely just on the ArcticWoof side. And I looked at all of the different levels and how much coverage we had in those different levels, or in this case, in the different domains. So as you can see, you know, audit and accountability is one of the strongest domains, but we have a lot of coverage in a lot of those other different domains. So a lot of help on the ArcticWoof side on that. We also have some good white papers that were written from a mutual partner of ours that they're a C3PAO, and they did essentially what I did. And as you can see here, our level coverage is pretty good as well. So essentially, one of the things I'll use this to touch on is each level builds off the previous. I don't know if I had mentioned that earlier. So meaning that in level 2, you have 72 controls in total. 17 of those 72 are level 1 controls. So that's what I mean by building off of the previous. So there's a lot of support overall, and I take a overwhelmingly conservative approach to mapping. So I suspect that in practice, the numbers might be a little bit higher on our overall coverage that we would have in CMMC.
Yeah, and I think that's something to understand, that you can get different services and layer them up. I'll tell you, one of the things that Executech is always appreciated with ArcticWoof as one of our strategic partners is their ability to ingest information and help with these controlled areas across many platforms, whether it's, you know, AWS or Azure, whether we're talking about, you know, Box, or we're talking about SharePoint, you know, Salesforce, where we're talking about Cylance for antivirus, whether it's Sophos or WebRoot, SentinelOne. ArcticWoof has that ability to ingest all that traffic and help us identify vulnerabilities and problems, and have acknowledging points with our artifacts in these individual control sets. So it's always good to know the right people at the right times and put things in the right place. It is very much layered. There's a lot of layers that have to be implemented in an environment. And I think that's where having the right strategic partnerships are the key. Having Executech support you, we're here to help. ArcticWoof's here to help. We work with them, they work with us. We work with some of you. I've seen some of the attending on the list here. I'm like, there's a lot of people I know and remember and have talked to throughout the last several years. So hi, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you guys since COVID, but hi. So we're here to answer any questions. And I think, Brad, if you want, we can open up if there's any additional questions to the group that we might be able to specifically answer.
I would love that.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been so much information, such great information. Man, we do love our acronyms in this industry, don't we?
LOL.
Yeah, no kidding. Does anybody else have any questions for these guys in general, whether it's about CMMC or just cybersecurity, what they like for lunch? Any other questions? Okay. Thank you everyone so much for attending. We hope this webinar was beneficial and educational. As I mentioned at the top, it has been recorded and we will put the recording on executech.com and we will also send it out to everyone who registered. We do have an assessment, a free assessment available to those who attended today. You will see it as you exit out of the webinar. I will also put it out here in the chat. James, do you want to just take a quick minute and tell us if somebody does need an assessment or wants to get an assessment with Executech, what kind of information, what kind of help will we be providing in that assessment?
Yeah, so this is basically, our assessments are equivalent to what would be considered a self-attestation assessment. Where are you at? And we're going to go through the controls and help identify what your SPURS score is, where you're at in your control sets. We have the ability to help generate the POAM. We have the the ability to help get you on the right tool sets. There's various things that you can use in the world of CMMC and NIST 800. So we can help align that. Some people don't want to do it manually in spreadsheets and all of that. So there's tools that will give you a centralized place to document all of this, which is one of the biggest pains of compliance. So we're going to be there to partner with you to help guide you and say, we like this, here's why, let you help make that decision a little easier. And then bring in the ArcticWoofs and the other products as we see needed to help meet those compliance standards.
Awesome. Thank you, James. And again, thank you everyone for attending and we have a great rest of your week. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, James.
Thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for joining.
See you guys.